Taylor Ashford was used to being wanted. She was not used to wanting someone back badly enough to lose her balance. By midnight, I was still thinking about the way Gabrielle Delaney had said, "I'm trying not to make a worse decision." About me. Not around me. Not because of the room. Not because she was tired, or bored, or politely managing another overconfident woman in silk. Because of me. This should have been flattering in the simple way. A clean, elegant victory. I walk into a gala, make one attorney regret his bloodline, tell a beautiful woman I didn't like seeing her with another man, and leave with just enough of her attention to ruin both our sleep. That was, under ordinary circumstances, a perfectly respectable evening. The problem was that there had been nothing ordinary about the way she looked at me when she said it. If you've spent enough years being wanted, you learn to recognize every version of it. The obvious one. The performative one. The one people weaponize when they want access to your life. Your name, your resources, your orbit. I could identify attraction the way sommeliers identify oak. Too much exposure. Professional hazard. But Gabi's restraint made everything harder to misread. She did want me. That much was clear. What unsettled me was that wanting me had not made her easier. It had made her sharper. Naomi and I were in the back of the car by then. Midtown receding behind us in long ribbons of gold. The city still awake in that glossy, self-important way only New York can manage after midnight. Naomi had her shoes off, which meant she was comfortable enough to be cruel. "You're smiling at the window," she said. "I'm looking at traffic." "You don't look at traffic like it just threatened your emotional stability." I adjusted the bracelet at my wrist, more to give my hand something to do than because it needed adjusting. "David Lang," I said. "Do we dislike him as a person or only as an interruption?" Naomi laughed softly. "As a person, he's probably perfectly adequate." How tragic. As an interruption, however, I think we can all agree he briefly became a humanitarian concern. I leaned back against the leather seat. He had his hand on her back. Naomi turned her head and stared at me with open pleasure. "Oh, we're saying it out loud now." "It was noticeable." "It was unbearable," Naomi corrected. "To you specifically." I didn't answer. That was answer enough. Naomi folded one leg under herself and watched me for a moment in silence. She was one of the few people in my life who knew when to stop joking and step closer to the truth without making a spectacle of it. "She interests you," she said at last. "Yes." "That's not what I asked." I turned to her. Naomi lifted one brow. "She matters already." "No," I said automatically. "Taylor." I looked away first, which I rarely recommend as a negotiating strategy. "She's beginning to," I admitted. Naomi sat back with the expression of a woman who had just watched a cathedral confess infidelity. "Well," she murmured. "That's inconvenient." The car slowed outside my building. I waited for the driver to open the door, stepped out into cold night air, and looked up at the darkened windows above. My home waited there in warm light and curated calm, and for the first time in a long while, it felt less like refuge and more like a place where I would continue thinking in circles. Naomi took my arm before we went inside. "Don't do what you usually do." That stopped me. I glanced at her. "You'll have to narrow that down. Don't turn this into a performance." Her voice had gone softer. "Don't send flowers and call it intimacy. Don't engineer 12 brilliant little encounters and pretend that counts as vulnerability. Don't make her feel extraordinary if what you really want is to stay in control." It was a very Naomi sentence. Precise enough to bruise, elegant enough to survive it. "I'm offended," I said. "You should be. It means I'm right." We rode the elevator up in silence. When the doors opened onto my floor, Naomi kissed my cheek and started toward the guest suite before pausing to look back at me. "And Taylor?" "Yes. If a woman says she's trying not to stay, the correct response is not to make leaving harder. It's to give her a reason to trust the staying." Then she disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone with my own silence and the deeply irritating possibility that for once, my oldest methods might actually be the wrong ones. I slept badly. Not in a dramatic way. I'm too disciplined for dramatic insomnia. I did not toss or get wine-drunk in silk, or pace the apartment in moonlight as though I were starring in an expensive adaptation of Poor Judgment. I simply woke at 3:15, thought about the sound of Gabi laughing under her breath, and remained awake long enough to resent my own bloodstream. By morning, I had done what I always do when something becomes emotionally untidy. I became efficient. At 8:30, I had a memo on my desk regarding the foundation's next quarter partnerships. At 8:42, I asked a perfectly legitimate question about a regional initiative that required clarification from cultural partnerships. At 9:10, I received a polished reply from Gabrielle Delaney herself. Not warm. Not cold. Precise. Happy to discuss. I'm in and out most of the morning, but I can make time after 1 if that works for you. No extra punctuation. No flirtation. No acknowledgement whatsoever of the fact that 4 nights earlier, she had looked at my mouth as if the room had ceased to deserve her attention. I read the message twice. Then once more, because apparently self-respect had left the building. My assistant, Mara, stepped in carrying a folder and paused when she saw my face. Is the timing bad? No, I closed the email. Quite the opposite. She set the folder down carefully. That's somehow worse. Mara had worked with me long enough to know when my tone meant I was pleased and when it meant I was about to become someone else's problem. At 1, I said, please move the budget review to Thursday. She checked her tablet. You have lunch with the foundation strategy team at 1. Do I? You insisted. I smiled. Then I'm growing. Mara stared for a second. Should I be scared? Only if you've done something interesting. She left unconvinced. At 12:58, I crossed the hall to the foundation offices with a folder I did not need and a level of composure I very much did. The offices were quieter than the board floors above, warmer, less metallic, softer around the edges. More women. More ideas. Fewer men who used the word scale as foreplay. Gabi's office door was open. She stood near the window with her back half turned to me, reading from a marked-up packet, glasses low on her nose. That should not have been as attractive as it was. Something about a woman in concentration. Something about not knowing until that second that Gabrielle Delaney wore glasses when she was working and finding the knowledge almost indecent. I knocked once against the open door. She looked up, pushed the glasses higher with one finger, and for half a second I saw surprise before she smoothed it away. Taylor. There was a pause before my name, and I liked it far more than was healthy. I realize this is unprofessional, I said, stepping inside, but I'm here to object to you becoming even more attractive in daylight. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not offended. Just measuring. That seems difficult to file correctly. I trust your department. The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile. Worse. An almost smile. Those were becoming dangerous. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. Was there actually a reason for the visit, or are you making a habit of showing up under vague pretenses? I had a question about regional outreach. And the vague pretenses? Those came free with the board appointment. That got a quiet breath of laughter from her. I sat. She remained standing for another second, still holding the packet, and I wondered whether she knew how much more power a woman has when she doesn't rush to be accommodating. Of course she knew. Gabi took her seat at last, crossing one leg over the other with that clean, economical grace she seemed to bring into every room. Today she wore charcoal trousers and a cream blouse under a dark jacket with the sleeves slightly pushed back. Less dramatic than the gala. More dangerous because it was real. You had a question, she said. I did. I opened the folder, though it was mostly theater, and asked the one legitimate thing I had bothered to prepare. She answered clearly, intelligently, with a depth of practical detail that immediately confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. She was good. Not decorative good. Not charming in meetings good. Serious, thoughtful, built to last good. When she spoke about community strategy, she did it with the attention of someone who understood what institutions owe the people they claim to serve. No buzzwords. No self-congratulation. Just substance. I found that almost offensively compelling. By the time we had finished the official discussion, I had forgotten to pretend this visit was primarily about work. So I said, closing the folder, "You're avoiding any reference to Friday." Gabi leaned back slightly in her chair. Am I? You haven't mentioned it once. You seem to have covered it thoroughly for both of us. That's unfair. It's accurate. I smiled. Naomi would like you. Your friend in black? Naomi Harlow. My oldest and least merciful ally. She looked like she enjoyed watching you suffer. She did. Gabi's gaze rested on my face for a moment. I did too. That landed low and bright somewhere under my ribs. Cruel. Observant. Do you enjoy saying things like that to powerful women? No, she folded her hands loosely in her lap. Only to the ones who claim not to know when they're being obvious. I never claimed that. You implied sophistication. I laughed then, properly, because there are only so many ways a beautiful woman can corner you with the truth before you have to admire her technique. Well, I said, for the record, I was obvious because you were there with another man. And I disliked it. She held my eyes. You've mentioned. Yes, I said softly. And I'll mention it again if necessary. A pause settled between us. Not awkward. Charged. Gabi's voice, when it came, had gone quieter. Why? There were polished answers. Attractive answers. Answers I could have given to half the city and been applauded for the phrasing. I chose the less flattering one. Because I wanted to be the one standing beside you. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly over one another. That was all. That was enough. I should have pressed. Instead, I sat there looking at her, strangely unwilling to cheapen the moment by decorating it. At last, she exhaled through her nose and looked down at the papers on her desk as if they had betrayed her. You say things like that very easily. I felt the shift immediately. There it was, the line beneath the line. Not to people who matter, I said. She looked back up. That's exactly the kind of sentence I don't know what to do with. I leaned forward slightly, forearms on my knees, closing the distance without forcing it. You could tell me. Her eyes flicked to my mouth, then back to my face. Dangerous, I thought. Not her. Me. Fine, she said. I don't know whether to believe you, because I suspect you say beautiful things with complete sincerity in the moment, and then leave other people to deal with the echo. That was so accurate it nearly felt invasive. I sat back again, slower this time. That was harsher than I deserved. No, Gabi's expression stayed calm. I think it was kinder than I could have been. We held each other's gaze across the desk. And for the first time since I had noticed her, I felt something underneath the game begin to move. Not defeat. Responsibility. I stood before I said something impulsive and expensive. Thank you for the briefing, I said. You're welcome. I paused at the door. For what it's worth, Gabrielle. She looked up. I'm very used to impressing people. I'm beginning to understand that may not actually be the assignment with you. Something softened in her face. Not surrender. Not even agreement. Just a small, unwilling acknowledgement that I had managed, briefly, to behave like an adult. That, she said, is the first sensible thing you've said to me. Harsh. Accurate. I smiled despite myself and left before I could ruin it. And because every story needs witnesses and every channel needs a little help from the people listening, tell me where you're listening from and leave a like if you're enjoying this one. YouTube behaves much better when people subscribe to the channels they want to keep alive, and Naomi would never forgive me if I let elegance die for lack of engagement. By Thursday evening, I had decided on restraint. This was a rare personal event, like a solar eclipse or a hedge fund manager paying for his own drink. My original instinct had been to send something beautiful. Flowers, probably. Not roses. They're unimaginative unless wielded with violence. White ranunculus, perhaps, or garden roses in muted cream, or some impossible arrangement that suggested I had excellent taste and access to rare florists. Something quiet and expensive that would arrive on Gabrielle's desk like a threat wrapped in tissue paper. Naomi, naturally, forbade it. You cannot send that woman flowers, she said over lunch, after I made the mistake of saying the thought aloud. Why not? Because she'll understand exactly what it means. I'd hope so. Naomi set down her fork. Taylor. The problem is not that she won't know it means you want her. The problem is that she'll know it also means you're trying to establish rhythm. Presence. Ownership without permission. I considered that. Naomi's expression sharpened. Don't look impressed. It encourages me. So what do you suggest? I suggest you ask her somewhere unimpressive enough to be honest. That sounds terrible. It sounds human. I finished my wine and looked out at the street below us. I don't do unimpressive. Naomi smiled. Exactly. At Fort Winnie that afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the coffee station on the 17th floor holding 2 paper cups I had acquired myself, which should tell you how seriously I had taken her advice. When Gabi came out of the conference room at the end of the hall, jacket over one arm, speaking quietly to a colleague, she saw me and stopped for just half a beat. Good. I offered her one of the cups. You brought me coffee, she said. I'm trying something low risk. She glanced at the cup, then at me. Should I be alarmed? Only if it's the wrong order. She took the coffee and looked at the lid. Her mouth moved. You remembered. Cream, no sugar. Her gaze lifted to mine again, and something in it shifted enough to make the floor under me feel conceptually unstable. That's not a difficult order, she said. No, I agreed. You are. A younger staffer brushed past us, offered a polite nod, and disappeared down the hall with the speed of someone who knew enough not to linger in potentially combustible territory. Gabi took a sip of the coffee and then leaned lightly against the counter beside me. Not too close. Close enough. That's a line, she said. Not a bad one. It's efficient. You've accused me of worse. She looked down into the cup, then back at me. What are you actually doing here? Making a modest effort to see whether you'll say yes to something if I ask like a person, instead of an institution. That got her attention. Oh, yes. Her expression remained unreadable. And what are you asking? Dinner. There. Cleanly. No silk around it. No charity event. No pretext. No architectural lighting and strategic pauses. Just dinner. Gabi was quiet for a second. Not theatrically. She simply took the question seriously, which was more unnerving than an immediate answer would have been. At the kind of place where no one can pronounce the menu and everyone has an opinion about the butter? She asked. Unfair. I know exactly one restaurant like that. How restrained of you. I smiled. I'm evolving. Her eyes flicked to mine. That remains to be seen. Then come to dinner and assess the evidence. Another pause. I'm not going to be one more woman you impress into a blur, she said finally. There was no hostility in it. Just a boundary offered in full daylight. I appreciated that more than I enjoyed hearing it. So don't blur, I said. And if that's your specialty, then I'll have to work outside my field. That almost got her. Almost. Gabi set the cup down on the counter between us and folded her arms loosely. No luxury ambushes. No private rooms. No place where the maitre d' acts like I've just joined a royal family because you walked in with me. I laughed under my breath. You've thought this through. I've thought you through. That one landed. Fine, I said. You choose. Her brows lifted slightly. Dangerous concession. Enjoy it while it lasts. Saturday, she said after a beat. There's a wine bar in the village. Small. Loud enough to be normal. You can survive being normal for one evening, can't you? Define survive. She ignored that. 7:30. I leaned one shoulder against the wall beside her. And this is dinner, not field research. She held my gaze. That depends how badly you behave. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. A phone rang. The office moved around us in all the ordinary fluorescent ways that offices do, and still the moment felt dangerously specific. Saturday, I repeated. 7:30. Gabi picked up her cup again, pushed herself lightly off the counter, and took one step away before looking back at me. One more thing. Yes. If you arrive in a town car and charm the entire room before I get there, I'm leaving. I smiled slowly. You make me want to be better. That isn't what I'm doing. No, I said. But it may happen anyway. She shook her head once, amused despite herself, and walked away. I stood there with my own coffee cooling in my hand and the extraordinary sensation of having just accepted terms from a woman who did not outrank me in title, money, proximity to the board, or practical influence, and feeling more exhilarated than insulted. By Friday night, I had thought about the wine bar too many times to describe myself honestly as balanced. I knew nothing useful about it except that it existed, it had been chosen by her, and it would almost certainly serve me something decent in stemware too humble for the occasion. I was trying with limited success not to Google photographs of the place like a teenager with legal counsel. Naomi came over for a drink and found me standing in front of my wardrobe looking at 3 dresses with the level of concentration usually reserved for constitutional crises. Oh, now this, she said from the doorway, is healing. I didn't turn around. One of these says effortless. One says I'm trying too hard to look effortless. And one says I own more than one apartment. Naomi stepped beside me and surveyed the options. The black one says sex. The ivory one says strategy. The navy one says you've decided to frighten her gently. That narrows nothing. Naomi plucked the black dress from the rack and hung it aside. Not this. Why? Because if you wear that, half the evening will become about whether she intends to survive you, and we've moved beyond survival. I looked at her. That's absurdly romantic for you. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to neglect. She considered the remaining two, then chose the navy one. Simple. Elegant. Long sleeves. A neckline that suggested self-respect and very bad ideas. This, she said. You look like a woman who could still ruin someone's life, but not on purpose. I'm touched. You should be. Naomi handed me the dress. And do not wear the diamond earrings. I wasn't going to. She stared. I was absolutely going to. Thought so. I changed while Naomi judged me from the sofa with a glass of red wine and the self-righteousness of a woman who had once prevented me from ending an affair with a note on hotel stationery. When I emerged, she looked up and went quiet for just a second. That second mattered. Well, I asked. Naomi smiled. You look exactly like the sort of woman a careful person should avoid. That sounds promising. It isn't. She set down her wine and stood. Taylor. Yes. When you get there, don't perform chemistry. Let it happen or don't. I took my coat from the chair. You say that as if I'm an actress. No, she said. You're worse. You're persuasive. Saturday night in the village was damp and alive in that particular way downtown always is. Streetlights in wet pavement. Voices spilling from narrow restaurants. Too much charm pressed shoulder to shoulder with impossible rent. I left the car 3 blocks away because Gabi had made her position clear, and because, to my own surprise, I wanted to get this right more than I wanted to get my way. The wine bar was small indeed. Brick walls, candlelit tables, bottles climbing shelves to the ceiling, the room humming with conversation rather than posing for it. Useful. Human. Slightly crowded. The kind of place where no one could be theatrically important without looking ridiculous. I approved against my will. Gabi was already there. Of course she was. She sat at a small table near the back, one hand around a glass of red wine, dark green blouse under a black jacket, hair tucked behind one ear. No spectacle. No attempt to stun. And still, when she looked up and saw me coming toward her, the room reduced itself without permission. I reached the table. You're early. So are you. I walked. That surprised her enough to be worth the wet pavement. You walked. I contain multitudes. She smiled. That remains under review. I sat across from her. The table was too small for distance, which I suspected had not been accidental. Good. Do you approve of the dress? I asked. That depends. On whether I'm rewarding honesty or encouraging bad behavior. I laughed. You do enjoy this. Sometimes. She lifted her glass. When you earn it. The server came. We ordered a bottle. Gabi chose it without performance, which I found more attractive than I was prepared to discuss in public. We shared small plates. Olives, cheese, grilled bread, something with anchovy I pretended to dislike so she would keep talking. And for the first 30 minutes, something extraordinary happened. We were normal. Not boring. Not flat. But normal in the way 2 intelligent women can become when neither is trying to win the room and both are trying, very carefully, to understand the person across from them. She told me about growing up in Connecticut with parents who worked too hard and loved well, about scholarships and internships and learning, young, how to enter rich rooms without apologizing for not having been born to them. I told her about my mother's discipline, my father's silence, the way power becomes ordinary when you grow up watching it used correctly and disastrously in equal measure. She asked better questions than most interviewers. I answered more honestly than most women I date ever get to hear me speak. At some point, I realized I had stopped calculating. That was new. When I mentioned that half the board still thought community investment was a decorative virtue, she leaned back and said, "And what do you think? That most powerful people prefer being thanked for generosity to being held to obligation." Gabi's eyes held mine over the rim of her glass. That's an answer. You sound surprised. I am. Because I look good in silk? Because you usually look like a woman who could outmaneuver sincerity if she found it inconvenient. I smiled slowly. And now, she said, I'm deciding whether you mean everything you say only when you're saying it. That was such a good line, I nearly admired myself for giving her the opportunity. I'm deciding the same thing about you, I said. She tipped her head. That doesn't seem fair. No, I agreed. But it feels intimate. The server interrupted with another plate and, for once in my life, I resented food. By the time the bottle was half gone, the room had grown louder around us. A couple at the bar was arguing quietly about Paris. Someone near the front had laughed too hard at nothing. Rain tapped once against the window and passed. Gabi brushed a crumb from the table with one fingertip and said, almost absently, David asked if I was seeing someone. My body reacted before my face did. That too was new. And what did you tell him? That I wasn't. I kept my voice even. Were you tempted to lie? Her eyes flicked up. Why? Should I have been? I'm asking. I know. I sat back in my chair and took a slow sip of wine. Do you do this on purpose? Do what? Say small things with catastrophic timing. She smiled into her glass. Sometimes. I looked at her for a long second, then let myself say it. I'm glad you told him no. The smile faded from her mouth. Not entirely. Just enough to let the seriousness breathe. You don't get much practice with not saying the thing, do you? Not when the thing seems worth saying. And if it costs you something? I held her gaze. Then at least the expense is interesting. She looked away first that time. Only for a second. Still, victory gets very subtle when the woman across from you has better self-control than most men have ambition. About halfway through the second glass, Gabi laughed at something I said and touched my wrist. Just once. Barely. If she had kissed me outright, it might have been less effective. Heat moved through me so quickly it felt humiliating. Her fingers were already gone, but my skin had registered them with the sort of fidelity normally reserved for betrayal. Gabi saw my face. Of course she did. The smallest shift came into her expression. Not triumph. Awareness. Interesting, she murmured. I leaned closer, resting one forearm lightly on the table. Don't do that if you're not prepared to take responsibility for the outcome. Her breath changed just enough to reward my honesty. You say things like that, she said softly, and then act surprised when people need distance. I'm not surprised you need distance. No. No, my eyes dropped once deliberately to her mouth. I'm surprised you think it's working. The noise of the room blurred. Not vanished. Blurred. The dangerous point. The point at which the ordinary world remains technically present but no longer deserves attention. Gabi set down her glass with careful precision. You're very confident for a woman sitting in a wine bar she did not choose. I'm adapting. That sounds suspiciously close to charm. It's much worse, I said. It's effort. That made her laugh, low and unwilling, and I knew right then that no matter how the evening ended, I was already in trouble deeper than I preferred. And if you've made it this far, like the video, subscribe and stay with me, because this is where the story stops being about attraction and starts becoming about timing, boundaries, and two women who are absolutely not handling any of it responsibly. Also tell me in the comments whether you trust Taylor yet, because frankly the review board is mixed. By the time we left, the streets were shining again. Rain had passed while we were inside, leaving the pavement slick and reflective, the village all dark windows and yellow light. Gabi shrugged into her coat outside the bar while I stood close enough to smell her perfume under the damp night air, something clean and warm and impossible to classify without getting indecent about it. My car is 3 blocks up, I said. She looked at me. You still brought one. I did say I contained multitudes. That's one word for it. We started walking. Not together at first, exactly. Side by side. A dangerous difference. The city had softened into that late-hour intimacy New York sometimes permits. Less noise, more detail. A woman laughing into her phone outside a bookstore. A florist mopping up rainwater. Jazz leaking from somewhere underground. Gabi walked with her hands in her pockets, shoulders relaxed, the heel of her boot sounding out a rhythm I was beginning to associate with poor judgment. You were quieter than I expected, she said after a block. Should I be insulted? No. Curious. I'm capable of normal conversation. Yes, she said. That was the surprise. I smiled. And you were less guarded than usual. She glanced at me. That sounds like a complaint. It sounds like gratitude. We stopped at a crosswalk, both of us facing the red hand flashing across the street. Gabi spoke without looking at me. You're easier one-on-one. That interested me. Then what? Then in rooms full of people who already know what you are. I turned slightly toward her. And what am I? She took a second too long to answer. Very good at being wanted. The light changed. We crossed. I should have said something clever. Something disarming. Something with enough self-awareness to count as humility and enough polish to keep the tone intact. Instead I said, I'm starting to think that may have become a liability. She looked at me then directly as we reached the curb on the other side. Only if you've finally met someone who doesn't think wanting you is enough. There it was. The whole shape of it. The reason she had unsettled me from the first moment. The reason flowers would have failed. The reason David Lang's hand on her back had felt less like jealousy and more like insult. Because Gabi did want me. And still expected more. I stopped walking. She stopped too. Rainwater glimmered at the edge of the curb. A car moved past too fast, spraying silver onto the street. Somewhere behind us, a couple argued softly over directions. "Come here," I said. The words were quiet. Not an order. Worse. An invitation spoken by a woman not used to hearing herself ask. Gabi didn't move. Not back. Not forward. "You see," she said softly. "That tone." What tone? The one that makes everything sound inevitable. I took one step closer. Not enough to touch her. Maybe this is. Her breath caught. There it was again. That tiny involuntary shift that rewarded me more than any declaration could have. "You shouldn't say things like that on a sidewalk," she murmured. "Why?" "Because it makes me forget I'm supposed to be careful." Every useful thought in my body stopped. I could have kissed her then. The distance was exactly right for it. The city had already blurred. She was looking at my mouth again, openly this time, with that same mix of tension and want that had haunted me since the gala. One more step. One hand at her jaw. The clean, shattering ease of it. Instead I asked, very softly, "Are you?" Her eyes lifted to mine. "Am I what?" "Careful." A long beat passed between us. Then Gabi smiled, the smallest, saddest little smile I had seen on her face so far. "Not enough," she said. A black car turned the corner at the far end of the block, mine. The timing felt vulgar. I looked at it, then back at her. I hate being rescued by logistics. That makes two of us. The driver slowed. I ignored him. Gabi's voice dropped. "If you kiss me now, I'm going to make a decision tonight that I'm not ready to make." That went through me like fire stripped down to wire. Not because it was refusal. Because it was the opposite. I held still with the sort of control one normally associates with bomb disposal. "That," I said, "is an exceptionally cruel thing to tell me in public." Her eyes flashed. "You asked." "I know." We stood there in the wet city light, too close, not touching, both of us hearing the shape of the thing we were not doing. My driver, to his credit, remained professionally invisible. I planned to reward him for that. At last Gabi stepped back first. Not far. "Enough." "I meant what I said," she told me. "I'm not going to be one more woman you impress into a blur." I nodded once. "I heard you. And I'm trying very hard to figure out how to want you without using all the ways I usually get what I want." That surprised her. Good. Because it was true. Gabi studied my face as if testing the sentence for structural weakness. "And how's that going?" she asked. I looked at her mouth, then back into her eyes. "Badly." This time her laugh was softer. More dangerous. More personal. "Well," she said, "at least that's honest." I opened the back door of the car and then, before getting in, looked at her one last time. "Wednesday," I said. She frowned slightly. "What's Wednesday?" "The foundation lunch." "I'll see you there." "That isn't a date." "No," I said. "It's me reminding you that this isn't over because you're good at sidewalks." Something lit in her gaze. A challenge. A warning. Interest. "You're impossible," she said. "So I've heard." I got into the car before I could do something unwise enough to make the entire evening meaningless. As we pulled away, I looked back through the rain-striped window and saw her still standing at the curb, coat wrapped close, watching the car leave with that unreadable expression that had already started costing me peace. By the time I reached home, I had exactly two stable conclusions. The first was that Gabrielle Delaney wanted me enough to stop me. The second was that I was no longer remotely interested in stopping. So tell me in the comments, what got you most in part 2? Was it the office scene, the wine bar, or that sidewalk moment when they both knew exactly what was about to happen? And whose side are you on right now? Taylor's, Gabi's, or Naomi's? If you want part 3, like the video and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because from here, restraint starts getting very expensive.